Hi, my name is Lorraine Watry and welcome to my studio. I am a watercolor artist and I've worked with watercolor for 26 years now, and I thought I would start a new series of videos where I go over different tips, tricks, and techniques for working with watercolor. And hopefully these short videos will help you in your journey, and if you have a question or a technique that you would like to see, please comment below and I will try to accommodate that in a future video. Hi, today's tip and trick video was requested by a viewer, and she was wondering what colors I have on my palette and some of the mixes that I like to make. So one of the first things that I'll mention is that I recently did a blog post on my website that talks about the different colors, their names, what brand they are, and some other information about my pigments. And I use a Stephen Quiller palette. I've used it various ones for a very long time, and I like the big center circle where I can do my mixes. I also use either artist or professional grade. It's the same quality pigments, just different brands use either artist or professional grade rather than student grade pigments. And I like them from the tube. I squeeze them out into the wells and then refresh it when I need to. Watercolor, if you are new to watercolor, does not have to be replaced every day. So if it dries, that's perfectly fine. And then when you go to paint with it, you can just re-wet and work with it. So squeezing a lot of pigment out into your palette is not an issue. There are some artists that like to start with fresh pigment every time they paint, which is totally fine. And then there are those of us that will just use the pigment that's in their palette. I have mostly Daniel Smith pigments on my palette and then some Holbein. And in the past I've used Winsor and Newton, De La Rowney, I have some M. Graham, and there are some other really good pigments out like Sennelier and some other brands as well. So there's not necessarily one choice, but just a variety. The reason I like the Daniel Smith is that they re-wet very easily, they are loaded with pigment, and they have a huge variety of colors. The pigments on my palette are mostly transparent pigments now, and I should say semi-transparent to transparent, and I will talk about that a little bit as I'm showing you some qualities of the paint. And I'm going to bring over my piece of paper that I got set up. One of the qualities on my palette is whether or not my pigments are light fast. I do not want my pigments fading over time on a painting that I've done, so I make sure that I use pigments that are listed as a 1 or a 2, being the excellent or very good light fast quality, so that I feel like my paintings are going to last a long time. All right, so I am getting out, this is cadmium red medium, and this is before the cadmium colors became a hue, and a hue means that it is more than one pigment mixed together to get close to the original color. And cadmium colors are actually poisonous, and so they the manufacturers have slowly changed over, and most of them now don't sell cadmium as in its original form, and they are now a hue. So this now would be probably made of 2 or 3 pigments in order to get close to this original color. So an opaque color is going to basically not allow as much light to go through. It's a little heavier, and so like here you can see that black line is not showing up. And then if I use quinacridone rose, which is a transparent pigment, and I will try to get it out as thickly as I used the cadmium red, and so not very much water in the mix, and you can see that even though I'm using it as a thick pigment, you can still see that black line. And I like transparent colors because I like the glow of the paper showing through them, and I also like how if I do layering, that the colors from beneath the different layers can show through the successive layers. So that is one of the properties of watercolor to think about when you're buying pigments. And then another is whether it's staining or non-staining. And I have placed cobalt and phthalo blue on the paper. And cobalt is a non-staining pigment. And so just a little bit of water and I can dab up that paint with a towel and I can get it back to the white of the paper, or very nearly the white of the paper. And with phthalo, if I try to do that same thing, same brush, some water, it is a lot harder to lift any of that color off because phthalo is a staining color. So it's not that you shouldn't use staining colors or you should use staining colors, but it's just good to be aware of them and the fact that and they may not be as easy to lift. Also, staining colors can tend to take over a mix. So if you're using a staining color with a non-staining color and you make a mix, it can want to be the dominant color in the mix. So you should just be aware of that. Granular versus non-granular, that means that some pigments have heavier parts to the particles in the pigment, and those heavier parts will drop to the surface of the paper easier, and you'll see little specks in the final color wash that's on your paper. So this is Sodalite Genuine by Daniel Smith, and the Primatech colors, these genuine colors, are made from pigments that are natural, that are mined from minerals and rocks and things, earth. And so they have a lot of granulation to them. So once that dries, hopefully it will show a little more granulation than, say, I will use my transparent pearl orange, which is non-granular, and I'll just place that on the paper. Now, if you're using a rough paper versus a cold press paper versus a hot press paper, you might notice a little difference in what you're seeing in the granulation as well. So the granulation can be interesting, or if you want a very smooth wash of color, then you might want to think about which pigment you're using. And a lot of the blues are very granular. The not quite as granular as the Sodalite Genuine. Your browns, your earth tones are generally granular, and the Primatech colors from Daniel Smith are granular. Most of the reds are not. The yellows generally are not. It just kind of depends on the brand, how they've made it, and then the particular pigment. So those are good things to test. Okay, so some different mixes that I like. I tend to use ultramarine blue and cobalt a lot. And so I will make mixes with these, and these are kind of my workhorse colors that I use for different things. So for cobalt, I might make a mix with Aureolin Yellow to make some greens, or New Gamboge to make some greens. So I'll show you both of those right quick. Let me just want to make sure my brush is clean before I go into my yellow. So this is Aureolin Yellow, and this is from Holbein. This yellow is a mix of 3 pigments because the original Aureolin Yellow from different other brands, it tends to change color and fade over not very much time. It can kind of go brownish looking, and it loses its vibrancy. So Holbein has come up with a pigment that's close to the original Aureolin Yellow, and so I'm using that because I really like that color. And then this is New Gamboge, and it's a warmer yellow. And so I will do a quick mix of New Gamboge and Cobalt, and so you can see that it's kind of a warm green, and I like that mix, and I can push this mix so that it's a little bluer or a little yellower, and those are good things to try when you're doing a mix of colors. So if I have more blue in the mix, the Cobalt and Aureolin yellow, this is a cooler green. But if I put more yellow in that mix, so it's still got the Cobalt and I just went into the yellow, I can make a totally different color that's a little more on the lime side of things. So depending on how much color of each you have in the mix will make a difference on what you're seeing in your mixes. All right, and then I can use Cobalt with my quinacridone rose that I had out, and I can make a very pretty purple, and I use this a lot. And then my brush wasn't quite clean, so it's got a little blue, more of the Cobalt in here and a little bit more of the rose right there, which I like when I'm doing mixes. I like to have that variety, and it makes that area more interesting. So then that's quinacridone rose mixed with the Cobalt, a little more of the rose. Actually, both of these are quinacridone rose and Cobalt. All right, and then a color mix that I use quite a bit, and it will either be Cobalt or ultramarine, and this is ultramarine I'm getting out, that I will use with burnt sienna. And burnt sienna and ultramarine will make a dark, almost black color, or you can make a gray from it, or you can make a variety of browns with it. And burnt sienna also works well with Cobalt that way. It just won't go quite as dark because the Cobalt itself won't go as dark. All right, so I have burnt sienna out, and I'm going to get some of the ultramarine blue with it. And already, because I don't have a lot of water in my brush, I can go pretty dark, almost black. And depending on what you're doing, it will look like a black, even though I don't have a true black on my palette because I mix my blacks. So that is a good mix for blacks, and I will often use this on aspen trees for the marks on the aspen trunk. And then I can make an interesting brown with it. I can also use a little bit of water and thin it and make a gray. And so, let's see, I'll put it right here. So this would be the gray that one of the grays, because you can get a variety of colors in that mix. All right, and then if I am going to make a black, I often will use phthalo blue staining color, and it's very deep in pigment, and I will use alizarin crimson, permanent alizarin crimson, because there are two alizarin crimsons out there, and the permanent one is the one that I want on my palette because the other is considered a fugitive color. All right, so I'll get some of that out, and then I just want to clean a little bit of that off my brush because I don't want all of that in the mix. I need a little more phthalo. Okay, so I have a lot, I have pigment and not a lot of water, and I'm going to go over into the permanent alizarin crimson. See if I can get it to, I have too much phthalo. And that will often happen when I'm doing a mix. If you have too much of one color in your brush, or you pull too much of the color, you might just have to have another brush handy that you can get some color out and adjust the mix. Okay, so that is my black that I will often use. I can add more blue to the mix and make it a bluer dark, or I could add more red to the mix and make it a more reddish or burgundy. Whoops, it's not quite showing. I'm going to grab some paint off of my brush there. Then I can push that color and it will be a little more on the burgundy side of a dark. And then, let's see, I will often use my Quin Rose with the yellows to make really nice oranges. So here's Quin Rose with some of the New Gamboge. And because this is a cooler red with a warmer yellow, you will have a little bit of a more neutral orange that will come of that. But if I use my cooler red, and by cooler I mean it's leaning toward purple or blue, and a warmer red is leaning toward orange or yellow. And so if I bring the Oriole and yellow out and I mix that with the rose, I will get a different look, a little bit of a warmer orange. Now if I want to go with the brightest orange though, I will use my warm red with my warm yellow. Oops, I already have some out. Oh no, I forgot that was the cadmium red. I don't want to use that. I want to use my Parole. Okay. And so this is Parole Scarlet with New Gamboge. And here is, oops, I'm going to make it a redder orange at first, red orange. And then if I place more of the New Gamboge in the mix, which I had too much red on my brush, I can very quickly make a very vibrant orange with that mix. All right, so some of the mixes I like. And then one of the other things that I wanted to mention is that if you were just starting out, do not feel like you need to go out and buy all of these colors or other colors that someone suggests or that you see on someone else's palette. It is a good idea when you're first starting to start with maybe 3 to 4, possibly up to 7 colors. And if I were going to choose 7 colors to use, I would choose a warm and a cool of each color. So, plus burnt sienna. And I just made a mess. Dripping water everywhere. Okay, so I would choose ultramarine blue. Whoops, I'll go a little darker. For my cool blue, I would choose phthalo. For my warm blue, use the transparent, Parole Scarlet as my warm red. And I would use Quin Rose, or I would buy Quin Rose as my cool red. And then I would get either lemon or Hansa yellow or Aureolin as my cool yellow, because this yellow is a little bit toward green. And then I would get New Gamboge as a warm yellow. And burnt sienna as an earth tone that you can use to either make a dark, almost black with ultramarine, or a deep kind of green, and I can show you that right quick, with phthalo. So phthalo and some burnt sienna. The staining colors are a little harder to get off your brush too, so that's another thing to note. All right, so here is phthalo blue and burnt sienna. It makes a very deep foresty green color, which is really nice. So when you are looking at figuring out what colors to use or what colors you might want to buy, I think it's a good idea to buy a color, use it for a little while, mix it with lots of other colors in your palette, and just concentrate on learning what that color does, what properties you like about it, or what mixes you can make that you like or don't like, and concentrate on using it, and then over time you can slowly add to your palette if you would like. I also switch my colors from painting to painting, so I'm not always using the same colors. I do not use all these colors in every painting I do. I might end up using maybe 4 to 8 colors in a painting. And they all tend to have a kind of a color scheme that either I figure out as I'm going, or that I do a color study prior to doing the painting. So the last thing is that I don't know if you can see now, but the granulation that happened with this pigment separated just a little bit, and I will actually dry this and place this as one of the ending images of the video so that you can see the different mixes and things, and I'll write what the mixes are on that image. So I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you will give some different colors a try, and or maybe limit yourself to fewer pigments and really learn what they can do by doing some color charts and playing with your colors. And I would encourage you to take a look at my blog post and learn a little bit more about the layout I have of my palette and the colors that are on it. And then if you have a suggestion for a future video, something that you would like to learn as a tip or trick for watercolor, please comment below, and like and subscribe will really help others who would like to learn some of these techniques to get the videos out there. And I hope you have a good day. Bye.